Everybody, welcome back to Pro AV today. I'm your host, Ben Thomas, but today's conversation is one that I wouldn't say is going to upset some folks, but it's a conversation really centered around the residential market and what we'll call the Pro AV world. And it's almost a weird distinction to not assume that the residential side of the world is professional, but the conversation we want to focus on today is a little bit more about our product design and development and building out standards for that industry and taking some of the things that we've learned from the core Pro AV markets, applying those same principles to the residential connected technology world. And we've got a couple of great folks on today to have that conversation and also make kind of a fun announcement. I think it's been released at this point, but a fun announcement kind of coming today. So we've got Mariusz Malkowski from Trident IoT and Mitch Klein, Executive Director of the Z-Wave Alliance. Gentlemen, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having us. I'm looking forward to this chat.
Well, and Mitch, we'll start with you, right? I want to ask the question before we kind of set the table about the larger conversation today, which is the commercial world the residential world, I wouldn't say has had an identity crisis over the last handful of years, but you see a lot of folks from traditional commercial and Pro AV find their way into the residential world. And what we've found is that there are some natural challenges, right? Commercial-centric technologies look a little bit different than maybe some traditional residential technologies. Obviously, talking about things like Z-Wave, even Bluetooth, a lot of Wi-Fi connectivity, that there's some natural hesitancy from time to time for folks in the professional side of the world to adapt. So if you would kind of level set for us, right? What does that discrepancy currently look like between maybe some of those residential standards and the traditional core Pro AV standards?
Well, I think one of the things to look at, even before you get into the standards, is really scope of work. And that's one of the things that is a tremendous difference between the commercial and the residential side, is that the scope of work in a commercial project is very well defined and pretty much work within that scope. And in the residential world, the term scope creep is part of the project. So when it comes to the technologies behind them, when you have fit-for-purpose technologies on the commercial side, they can be proprietary, they can be walled gardens, they can be any number of things. And when you talk about scope of work and best use cases in the residential world, things like interoperability become important, because now in the residential world, there's way more devices, there's way more use cases, and there's another thing called, I would say, the personal involvement in the residential side. So interoperability becomes a big challenge for the residential side.
And that's where we bring Mariusz in. Mariusz, obviously somebody with years of knowledge and expertise in the residential side of the world. And if you didn't recognize the name Trident IoT, it's because it's brand new. Mariusz being one of the co-founders of that. You know, when you think about what Mitch said from a standardization and even things like scope creep, there's a natural disconnect between traditional residential and maybe a lot of the other commercial verticals. What are some of the ways that you've seen that? But what are some of the things that Trident IoT specifically is aiming to help bridge that gap?
Now, very good question, and thank you for calling me. And I think Mitch already talked about the important one, interoperability within the standard, right? That's the first barrier that needs to be addressed. And then you have all the plethora of home standards that are available today, so making it easier for those standards to interoperate, right? And for the platform providers to recognize, first of all, that there's many of these standards out there, Z-Wave, Zigbee, Matter, you name it, but also making sure they all work well together and play nicely together. And, one of the barriers is if they don't, then the consumer is going to be confused. It's going to get to that, scope creep really quick, because the light switch for the consumer, it's a light switch, right? And it should be. It should not matter if it's Z-Wave, Matter, Thread. It should just work. And that's what we are trying and are hoping to address through product development, helping customers to decide which technology to use to fit the actual installation or the process or you name it, and the ecosystems that those devices should play with. We'll help design, provide silicon for it, and even help certify it for some of these ecosystems.
Well, and Mitch, I want to pinpoint something that Mariusz just said, and that was the experience of the end user. And it's very difficult to overstate the importance of interoperability for the end user, right? And as much as we want to pretend like it doesn't happen, no matter what installation we do, people are always one Alexa away from trying to break the entire system, right, and making things not work. But the reality is that especially on the consumer and residential side, those worlds have to coexist, right? Where I've got to be able to buy an Alexa device, and that needs to work with my integrated, home theater system. What are some of the things from an end user and buyer standpoint that you're seeing in addition to interoperability that we have to continue to address as a core professional and enterprise community?
Well, I think the easy one there is ease of use. There's any number of brands building light switches, just to use Mariusz's example. And each dimmer works a little differently, but it's a paddle in the wall and it's easy to figure out. But as soon as you start putting it into an application on your phone, or having to tell an Amazon, Mrs. A, if you will, because I don't want mine talking to me right now, or an Apple or a Google or any of them, to have to recall, okay, which room, what scene. I mean, there's a lot you have to think about. How do we get away from a lot to think about and just make it natural human voice, natural touch? This is something that's really important on the consumer side, residential side, that is a lot easier to address in your commercial installations, because people are going to go to this touch screen and I'm only going to hit this button and do this thing. In the home, you've got 20, 40, 60, 200 dimmers, right? So which one do I want to tell my Amazon device to turn on or turn off? So ease of use is really important.
Well, you bring up a good point too, and I think it's so important, and Mariusz, you guys can speak to this as well, is that if we're being transparent, I don't think the average user needs to know what a Z-Wave or a Bluetooth technology or whatever Wi-Fi band that they're on. I don't think they need to know that, right? A lot of that burden actually falls on the manufacturer, the installer side. But just to kind of set the table for us, especially as we have folks from different communities kind of listening to this, can you describe some of the core differences between Z-Wave specifically versus traditional spectrum in things like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth?
Sure. I would say interoperability, coming back to the same one, is super important. That's what the protocol was designed with from a day one. The second important difference between your, let's say, 2.4 is the spectrum that Z-Wave is in, that being a sub-gigahertz, which allows us or benefits us with the better range and less interference. I believe those two are the two major differentiators between Z-Wave and other technologies. Obviously, there is some newcomers to sub-gigahertz pairs as well, but we've been at it for 20 or so years and very interoperable and very robust network. Those are, I would say, the two top. Would you agree, Mitch?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Well, yeah, and I want to reframe kind of the question too for you, Mitch,
Sure.
and I think this is a good place to start. Is that I'll use this as probably not an exact one-to-one example, but end users and consumers are familiar with HDMI. They're familiar with Bluetooth. They're familiar with Wi-Fi. Is there a benefit to actually teaching and training the end user specifically about Z-Wave as a whole and some of the values of that, so they can be better equipped to even make purchases on Amazon or B&H or wherever they're buying their stuff?
Is there a benefit? Absolutely. Is it realistic to expect? Not really. And we made the decision on the Z-Wave side that our goal can't be to educate a consumer, because that's going to be really, really difficult. The key is just to be able to pick up a product and make sure it just works, which is why we work with some of the other organizations, why there are things called hubs and bridges, the kind of boxes that consumers perhaps don't want to buy because they don't see any value in it, when the value really is in that box, in that software that ensures devices are going to work together.
Well, I think, Mariusz, this is a great place for Trident to kind of speak into the world, right? Where and I honestly tend to agree. I think it's great to have a professional specific market that you're trying to educate and teach, especially from a product development standpoint, right? And that's one of the things that Trident is aiming to do, which is not only teach and introduce some of these technologies maybe to people who haven't been playing with them before, but also to help with the product design and amplification side of things, especially as we're talking about speed to market, right? Technologies change every 5 minutes in the industry, and every Black Friday, you see something totally different that came through the other previous years. How important is someone like Trident to helping speed and go to market?
I mean, very good question. That's why we're here as Trident, right? Because it's a minefield when you think about what's available. It's easy to build a one-off device, as I call it, which is a single purpose. You give it an app, and then what's next? It's much harder to play within ecosystems and design a product that fits well, works well, and sells well into an ecosystem. And that's where we come in as Trident as well. We have experience in pretty much any major ecosystem. Between myself and our partners and our engineers, we design hundreds of products to fit to Samsung ecosystem, Amazon ecosystem, Ring, security providers ecosystem. So it's super important. And I think that's what the companies will find. And that's what I enjoyed over the years. It's working with the companies and building very successful products that change markets.
Well, Mariusz, I want to follow up on that, and Mitch, I'll give you a second to respond here after that. Mariusz, when you think about maybe companies and manufacturers who haven't historically played in the residential world, there are folks trying to get into that market all the time. Where do those people start? Right, they're used to conversations about standards like NDI and IPMX and all these different standards that kind of exist in a little bit more of a professional ecosystem. What would you say to a manufacturer who's looking to really embrace the Z-Wave technology and adapt products specifically into the residential world for the first time?
I mean, Z-Wave brings something very unique, which is that going back to interoperability. You design it once, and it's going to work with everybody that works and supports Z-Wave technology. So from a device maker perspective, that makes it very easy. You design the product once, you go and certify through a Z-Wave certification process, and it's going to work 100% with that Z-Wave controller, with that Z-Wave hub.
Well, and Mitch, I want to give you the last word here, right? As somebody who has had such an influence in standardization across residential technology, you see folks competing, whether it's closed ecosystems, whether it's, open standards. You see folks all the time trying to introduce these new platforms and services and protocols. What do you think is next for not only Z-Wave, but for the standardization market in the residential world as a whole? Are we going to continue to lean into 2 or 3, 4 standards, or is it something you're going to continue to see to open up?
Yeah, great question. And I think ultimately what's going to happen is it just works. We're going to get there. So someone will be able to pull a product off the shelf and it will just work. We're a few years away from that. But there are a number of organizations looking to establish and get to that point. I would like to just expand a bit just on what Mariusz said. And the beauty of building your Z-Wave device is you instantly have an entire ecosystem of interoperable products. And what that means is if I've now built a Z-Wave widget, I'm a pro company, but now I want to put something in the consumer market. If I build it into Z-Wave, that one product I build can now work in every one of the Z-Wave ecosystems, whether it's as Mariusz mentioned, whether it's a Samsung or a Ring or any of the other Z-Wave side. Ultimately, you want to get to the point where you develop the product with the best technology that's fit for the purpose of the device you're building. If you need a big wide bandwidth device, you're going to build it on Wi-Fi. If you need a highly secure, highly reliable mesh product, you're going to build it on Z-Wave. And whatever that happens to be, ultimately, it's all going to work together. We're not there yet. So right now, build with Z-Wave and it will come.
Shameless plug. You got to love it. And I'll allow it. This is my show, but I'll allow it. Gentlemen, I appreciate you coming on, and let this be the first of many conversations, because I think both of our industries have been insulated for a long time. And yeah, there are some people who've crossed over. There's some people who've done it really well. But as we continue to step forward as an industry, as we continue to see some ubiquity across technologies from the residential side making their way into the professional world, I think this is a conversation that we're going to have to keep having. So I appreciate you coming on today, and I'm looking forward to having you both on in the future.
Agreed. Thanks for having us, Ben.
And thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to watch and subscribe to Pro AV Today. We will see you next time.